Welcome back to the GSMC Hockey Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Garrison McDaniel, and we're on to our fifth and final segment of the night, the Columbus Blue Jackets season preview. This team, okay, I've grown up in Columbus my entire life. I have this in the background was on purpose for this episode. It wasn't so I could show bias. It's so this is a picture of Rick Nash, Jody Shelley, who was a winger for the Blue Jackets in their early days, and Mark Denis, which was a starting goalie for the Blue Jackets when they first started around like 2003, 2004 era. It is a sign. It's a signed picture from all three of them as well. So, had to put that up there because I knew I was talking about the Blue Jackets. This team is so similar to their team last season. What was a big problem with the team last season was it's young and it needs to develop. Well, yes, that's fine and all, but you're not really getting better, right? The only addition was Sean Monahan on this in this offseason because, Caden Lindstrom's not going to be playing for this team next season, of course, the 4th overall pick. And then, you got guys like Adam Fantilli, which is a good player, coming back. Kent Johnson might come back to this team. But other than that, this team looks pretty rough, right? When you're looking at the forward group, when you're looking at the lines, it's Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan, and Kirill Marchenko. If Johnny Gaudreau can play the level that we saw in 2021-2022 with the Calgary Flames, this team can be very good. Kirill Marchenko had a fantastic season last season. His rookie year was second on the team in points. I think had 20-something goals, which led the Blue Jackets in goals. The team just couldn't score and gave up a lot of goals. I think was one of the worst in goals against in the entire NHL. And then a second line being a very young second line, Kent Johnson, Adam Fantilli, Yegor Chinakhov. This is, of course, projected lines. Adam Fantilli's 19, Kent Johnson's 21, Yegor Chinakhov is 22, 23. So very young second line. And then Boone Jenner, Cole Sillinger, Dmitry Voronkov. Dmitry Voronkov's in his second year. Cole Sillinger is in his third year in the NHL now. I think he's 21 years old, though. He started when he was 18. And then Boone Jenner, who is the only real veteran on this team. And then that fourth line, Justin Danforth, Sean Corrali, Matthew Olivier, is not going to help you out too much. As we saw last season, it's not going to give you anything really when it comes to offense. Their defense looks good, but it needs to play up to the level that the front office believes it can play up to. Zach Werenski is one of the best defensemen in the NHL. But ever since he lost Seth Jones as a defensive pairing, it's been difficult for him because he hasn't had that, consistent. Damon Severson played as his defensive pair a lot last year, but we don't know we don't know how that's going to look when it comes to a team that's serious, right? A team that's really contending. And Damon Severson had some bad plays throughout the year last year, had some bad turnovers that resulted in goals against, and it just needs to be cleaner if the Blue Jackets want to improve. Then the second line defensive pairing, Ivan Provorov and David Jiricek. David Jiricek, of course, 20 years old, 2 years now removed from his draft year, but looking to be one of the better defensemen from that draft, with Simon Nemec, also Pavel Mintyukov, and David Jiricek. It was a big draft when it comes to defensemen. All of them are going to be playing in the NHL this season. That's going to be a fun storyline to watch. And then they got Jack Johnson back in this offseason, which is just funny. Guy played for the Blue Jackets for 7 years, and then, of course, having to file bankruptcy, having to leave Columbus. It was a little bit of a falling out when he did leave Columbus, going to win a Stanley Cup in 2022 with the Colorado Avalanche, now coming back to the Columbus Blue Jackets. His defensive pair right now is going to be Eric Goodbranson. Eric Goodbranson is on his third year of a 4x4 that he signed back in 2022. That was very unwanted by the fan base in Columbus when he signed it because it blocked prospects, right? Like, the Blue Jackets have such a fantastic prospect pool, and this is what we'll get into later in this conversation, but having a 30-something-year-old defenseman on a 4x4 blocking the prospects, which it did block prospects. Like, it blocked David Jiricek last season from being able to play up in the NHL. It has blocked Nick Blankenburg in the past, blocked Jay Christensen. So I mean, Eric Branson does block these guys, these right-handed defensemen that need to jump up. But what are you going to do? And then when it comes to their goaltending situation, it is probably one of the worst in the NHL. It's Elvis Merzlikins and Daniil Tarasov, whoever you're going to pick as the starter. It doesn't really matter. It still doesn't look too good. Now, when you look at, the contracts here, when you look at the contracts here, it's pretty rough, right? It's Johnny Gaudreau was making nearly $10 million and put up 60 points last season. Sean Monahan on a 5.5 for the next 5 years. That was signed this offseason. We don't know what that's going to look like. Boone Jenner is your third highest paying forward at less than $4 million. Of course, they still haven't signed Kirill Marchenko or Cole Sillinger or Kent Johnson this offseason, but I believe all three of those are going to be bridge candidates that are only going to get 1 or 2 year deals, and see where they're at when they're more UFA and then instead of RFAs. Defensive wise, I mean, it's $9.5 million to Zach Werenski. That's probably the only good contract on this entire team. Damon Severson making $6.25, which is a fairly reasonable contract until you realize that he's making that for the next 7 years in Columbus until he's 36, and he already showed signs of regression last season. Ivan Provorov only here for 1 more year as things stands if they don't extend him. Eric Branson, as I mentioned, 2 more years on a 4x4, and Jack Johnson signing a 1 year $775,000. Now, when you get into the exciting part of Columbus, right? When you get into what makes this team feel a little bit more confident going forward, is the prospect pool. This prospect pool is really good. It is. I mean, we talk about it being one of the best in the NHL, right? Gavin Brindley is kind of the cream of the crop, I guess you could say, for their prospects. He's 19 years old, just had a fantastic year in Michigan. Was one of their best forwards on a stacked Michigan team with like Frank Nazar and Rucker McGordy and players like that. Gavin Brindley was the one, and I watched it from the press box when I wrote for Ohio State. I watched this kid just absolutely light it up. And he played at a different level, and I thought that he was the best player on the ice whenever he was on the ice. And then you get into the rest of the forward prospects, like Luca Del Belbelou's second-round pick from a couple years ago. They're really excited about. Luca Pinelli, they drafted a couple years ago. He looks pretty good, just signed an entry-level deal. James Malatesta, who the Blue Jackets have always been very, very high on, has looked even better, was a big part of a Memorial Cup winning team a year ago. Jordan DeMay was in a points race with Connor Bedard in the minor leagues a couple years ago when he was 18 or 19. He's now 20. He might be able to play up here soon. And then you got pieces like Denson Matejchuk, a former 12th overall pick who can be ready this upcoming season. Carson Kuhlman's a former first-round pick, I think 25th overall, who could be ready this upcoming season. Has played pretty well for Wisconsin in the NCAA. Stanislav Svozil, a former teammate of Connor Bedard. He's looked pretty good. Jake Christensen has looked pretty good in his time. So this prospect pool is really good. And then they have Jack Greaves, who is a fantastic goaltender, who they're very excited about as well. And then when you look even more into their prospect pool, they have a array of other guys like Caden Lindstrom, Luca Morelli, who they're very high on, Tyler Peddle, who they're very high on, William Whitelaw, who they're very, very high on. I think that's one of the guys that they like the most in this prospect pool. And then like Kirill Dolzhenkov, who was drafted in 2022, they like a lot. They really feel like they've gotten a lot of good value picks in recent memory. So we'll see what that looks like. Charlie Ellick, who was their second round pick this past season, he's looked pretty good as well. So the Blue Jackets, the team is bad right now. But when we're talking about the season preview, you got to take it into account with their prospect pool, which is a fantastic. This prospect pool it has every position. It's so deep, and they just need to develop and get to the NHL in 1 or 2 years' time for the Blue Jackets to start winning and be a serious team. They already got guys that contribute. They have guys on their. I mean, it's a young team, 23. 23, 19, 19, 23, 23, 21. In their defense, they have that 26-year-old Zach Werenski. They have 20-year-old David Jiricek. They have 20-year-old Denton Matejchuk. It's a very, very young team, and that's kind of the exciting part in Columbus. So we'll see what that looks like. Where do I have them projected for next season? Well, I would say I think 7th in the Metro. I think they get out of the basement, they get out of the bottom part, but I don't think that they go up too much. I think that the Metro looks very scary and is a good division for in the NHL. I think that they'll be better than the Flyers next season, and I think that that's it. I think the Flyers got worse throughout this offseason, and the Blue Jackets did get just a little bit better. So that'll wrap it up for the Blue Jackets season preview, and that'll wrap it up for the GSMC Hockey Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you guys for all tuning in. I do appreciate your support. If you guys liked this episode, remember to like and subscribe on YouTube. Rate us on whatever podcast platform you listen to this on, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you did enjoy this podcast, you could get more content and updates from the GSMC Sports Network on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. With that all being said, I'd like to thank you guys once again for tuning in to the GSMC Hockey Podcast. Thank you all, and have a fantastic and wonderful evening. I ate a shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't want to go to work. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of